being guilted for loving Robin.
Yes,
The Browns consistently asserted that their family was founded on faith, trust, and openness. For years, fans watched as they weaved through the intricacies of plural marriage, the challenges of creating a life together, and the trials that came with having a large family in the public eye. But then, evidence came out in court that was a far cry from this story. A tale of backroom deals, covered-up papers, and financial transactions none of the wives were ever supposed to see. It all started subtly, with rumors of missing funds and inexplicable payments. Christine had picked up on discrepancies long before anyone else. Minor cash withdrawals here, unsourced spending there. She attributed it to the disorganization of a big family at first. But with time, the quantities became too substantial to overlook. Janelle, being a practical person, kept records and receipts. And it was she who ultimately had it out with Kody. His account was evasive, dismissive. He reassured her not to worry. These were just business costs associated with family prospects. But Janelle wasn't placated, and she wasn't alone. Mary had become suspicious as well. For years, she had been kept at arm's length, informed that she wasn't so much involved in family matters anymore. Whenever she asked about money, she was fobbed off. She knew there were deals being made behind the scenes. Deals that didn't involve her and Robin. She was always in the picture. She talked boldly of money, of plans, of investments that the other wives had never been asked about. The court files that finally emerged yanked the curtain off years of covert negotiations. The evidence exposed a sequence of covert arrangements that painted a considerably different picture of the Browns' financial situation. Properties had been purchased and sold through shell companies. Contracts had been inked unknown to all the parties involved, and payments had been routed through accounts that no one else could touch. The most surprising revelation came in the form of a string of emails introduced at trial. The emails revealed Kody negotiating with third-party investors regarding deals for ventures none of his wives were aware of. He talked about how he could use the name of the family, of spinning off businesses, of using the sister wives' brand as collateral in commercial transactions. And meanwhile, he assured his wives that finances were strained, that sacrifices would have to be made, that everyone would have to pull together in support of their common dream. The wives' responses to the proof were revealing. Christine's disappointment was almost palpable. She had struggled for years to hold the family together, believing in the dream that Kody had promoted them. But looking at those papers made her understand that dream had never really been hers. It had been Kody's dream, and his alone. Janelle, however, felt vindicated. She knew something was not right, and now she had the proof. But that proof did not soften the pang of betrayal. For her, it was not money alone, it was respect, honesty, and the right to be treated as a partner. Mary's silence, when faced with the evidence, spoke volumes. She had long been excluded from decisions, but seeing the scope of Kody's secrecy left her stunned. For years, she had questioned whether she was simply imagining her exclusion, whether she was being too sensitive. The court evidence confirmed that she had been right all along. Her instincts had never betrayed her, but Kody had. And then, Robin. The papers flashed her name repeatedly, accounts in her name, houses bought into her trust, signatures linking her to Kody's hidden business ventures. Fans who had sympathized with Robin turned around and viewed her differently. Was she an innocent victim of Kody's manipulations, or was she in on it the whole time? The court documents didn't provide easy answers, but they asked questions no one could ignore. The soap opera spilled far outside the courtroom. Supporters who had been following the Browns for more than a decade felt betrayed. They had invested their emotions and time in a family who had espoused honesty and togetherness, only to find out that most of what they were witnessing was staged. Social media was abuzz with anger, with supporters calling for accountability. Others came to the defense of the wives, saying they were manipulated victims. Others accused them of turning a blind eye for too long. What nobody could dispute was that the evidence changed everything. The Browns were no longer reality television celebrities. They were the faces of a scandal that had the potential to destroy everything they had created. The perfectly constructed image of a family struggling, but making it together was destroyed. Instead was a broken family, shattered by secrets, money, and deceit. As the court hearings went on, additional documents came to light. Agreements made without permission, cash payments made to conceal them, business ventures that walked the line between family and exploitation. It was apparent that these weren't one-off events. They were all part of a larger trend. A trend that indicated Kody had been playing a game of long patience, creating his own empire while misleading his wives. The wives started questioning everything. If Kody was able to conceal this from them, what else did he conceal? Was their union ever really about faith and family? Or was it always about power and control? Every new discovery drove them further apart, making it increasingly difficult to believe in the vision of oneness that had kept them together. And so the Browns stood at a fork in the road. The courtroom testimony was irrefutable, the clandestine bargains revealed. But what were they going to do with this information? Were they going to stand united and demand answers, or were the secrets going to finally tear them apart forever? One thing was for sure, the Brown story would never again be the same. What began as a reality show based on love and religion had turned into a moral fable about deception, betrayal, and the price of pursuing an empire no matter the cost. And as the evidence kept on speaking, the Browns could no longer deny the truth. Court proceedings became more heated with each new piece of evidence that was introduced. What had started as rumors of missing money had escalated into an all-out expose, with receipts, contracts, and affidavits piling up against Kody. Every page uncovered another layer of the empire he had so painstakingly concealed from the people who trusted him most. The most incriminating piece of evidence was a series of property transfers. Land that had been bought in the name of family investments was quietly transferred to businesses in which Kody held control, with Robin's name listed as a trustee on many of them. The wives had been led to believe these acquisitions were for the family's future, that they were creating security for their children. In reality, the facts indicated titles had been removed from family trusts and deposited into private holdings. The courtroom hummed as attorneys presented the chronology. The deals dated back years. Years before Christine departed. Years before Janelle questioned his dominance. The falsehood wasn't new. It had been a continuous activity for almost a decade. To followers, this painted the picture of premeditation. Kody hadn't simply been making poor decisions in a moment of passion. He had been working on a sequence of clandestine transactions with his wives shut out from the very beginning. Christine's response to this discovery was crushingly disappointing. She testified in court that once she had trusted Kody absolutely, that she had believed in his vision for their future. But seeing her own name left out of property titles destroyed that trust irreparably. She confided with friends that she felt like a mere prop, a smiling presence for a show that bankrolled an empire from which she would never receive benefit. Janelle, being the practical pragmatist that she was, saw something more disturbing still in the court documents. Most of these loans used to finance these property acquisitions had been backed by collateral from family businesses, some of which she had worked so hard to establish. This meant that not only had Kody pushed her out, but he had jeopardized her work to set up his secret fortune. She was furious. To her, this wasn't betrayal. It was theft. Mari, quieter, but no less tense, sat rigidly in the courtroom. Her eyes were barely diverted from Kody. She seemed to be waiting for a glimmer of remorse, a flash of recognition that he had overstepped. But Kody did not flinch, his eyes fixed straight ahead. To Mary, that silence was louder than any apology could ever be. And Robin, her name repeatedly coming up in the documentation, could no longer avoid being swept up in the storm. Fans had been arguing for years about her place in the family's disintegration. But now the evidence connected her directly to the financial spin. If she had been fully complicit or just following where Kody led, whatever her level of knowledge, her signature on the documents made her an integral part of the scandal. Her protestation that she had always refused special treatment sounded empty as fans parsed the evidence. The most bombshell of the hearings was when emails between Kody and a third-party investor were read. In them, Kody described his wives as obstacles to his financial schemes. He said they did not grasp the big picture, and that not telling them was the only way he could keep the deals moving. Gasps filled the courtroom as those words echoed through the hall. It wasn't money anymore. It was about intent. Kody had actively hidden what he had done, not out of neglect, but out of design. The backlash came immediately. Christine emerged from the courthouse in tears, refusing to comment on questions posed by reporters. Janelle, trembling, spoke with a journalist that the betrayal was more deep-seated than she would have ever thought possible. Mary walked in silence, her face impassive, and Robin, escorted by security personnel, endured a chorus of boos and insults from outraged fans who had once stood up for her. It took only moments on social media for the response to come boiling over. Fans were outraged, demanding to know how long TLC had been aware of the hidden arrangements. Some accused the network of turning a blind eye for the sake of ratings. Others were finger-pointing at Robin, accusing her of being in on Kody's schemes. Call for justice hashtags trending across the platforms saw thousands of viewers promising to no longer watch the show. The story that had once characterized the Browns, a tale of faith, family, and determination, was no more. Instead, a scandal so large, so incriminating, it could destroy everything they had created. Kody, the dynamic leader, now exposed as a man who prioritized control and gain above the very family he professed to protect. Yet, even as the evidence mounted, Kody refused to back down. In interviews outside the courtroom, he dismissed the allegations as exaggerations. He insisted that the deals were legitimate, that the wives had simply misunderstood the complexities of business. But his words carried little weight. Each time he tried to explain, another document surfaced that contradicted him. The more he spoke, the less anyone believed. For the wives, the scandal was a turning point. Christine started talking more candidly about her suffering, describing a marriage in which she had been continually silenced. Janelle started looking into her legal rights, intent on taking a fight for her fair share of the fortune she'd built. Even Mary, who had long hovered on the periphery of the family, started to propose that silence was not an option anymore. The court proceedings came to be less about finding the truth, and more about seeing the breakdown of an image built up meticulously. The Browns, once presented as an unlikely but heartwarming example of family, were now ridiculed and scorned. Audiences who used to root for them on their determination now disapproved of them for being secretive. And along the way, the evidence kept saying more than any defense that Kody might try to make. Each contract, each email, each transfer said the same thing. This was no accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a years-long pattern of lying intended to enrich Kody and Robin at the expense of everyone else. The one question that plagued the fans, the wives, and even Kody himself was this: how much evidence was out there? If all these documents were revealed, what else was hiding beneath, just waiting for its turn to emerge? For the Browns, the harm was already done. Their dynasty was no longer founded on trust or faith. It was founded on secrets, and now those secrets had been brought into the light for the world to witness. The courtroom drama was at a fever pitch, but the storm was really raging outside its doors. News channels picked apart every bit of testimony, every new development, and fans clogged social media with their own conspiracy theories. In an instant, the Browns were no longer mere reality television personalities. They were the focus of one of the most popular scandals in the entertainment world. Christine, who had up until then kept her cool during the majority of the hearings, at last gave vent to anger. In a tearful post-court interview, she stated that she felt erased from the family budget, like decades of devotion and dedication hadn't counted for anything. Her voice trembled as she recounted the myriad nights she had bankrolled Kody's fantasies, convinced they were shared ambitions. Now, gazing at the proof, she understood those dreams had never been hers at all. Her words hit hard with viewers who had followed her story for years. Fans rallied round her, taking to her social media with a flood of messages of support. Many told her that they felt they had been tricked too, that the romance shown on television had been a cleverly edited disguise over something much darker. Janelle, on the other hand, had a different tack. Serene but assertive, she set about scrutinizing the fiscal records in depth, drawing upon her own experience of family administration to underscore the inconsistencies. She indicated how money that had been identified for shared projects, such as the much-hyped Kody Pass development, had instead been channeled into accounts that she and the other wives could not access. With precision, she outlined how Kody's alibis simply wouldn't stack up. Her precision was devastating. When she presented the figures, even the judge hesitated, obviously taken aback by the sheer deliberateness of the transfers. This was not an accident of poor bookkeeping or mere blunders. It was a deliberate attempt to transfer funds where Kody and Robin had sole control over them. Mary, who had normally hung back from the family saga, caught everyone off guard by coming forward. She spoke softly but firmly, admitting to having realized for years that something was not right but had remained silent. Dreading the consequences of speaking up, she recounted feeling isolated, belittled, and regularly dismissed when trying to raise an issue. Her evidence was haunting. Not only had she been pushed out, but she had been taught she needed to be silent in order to maintain the family. As she spoke, the courtroom went silent. For the first time, Mary wasn't the forgotten wife or the left behind. She was a witness to the emotional toll of Kody's empire. And in that moment, her pain became irrefutable evidence that the deals had never been just about money. They had been about control, power, and manipulation. Robin's part became more and more complex day by day. Although she claimed ignorance of willful misdeeds, her name was still reflected page after page in document after document. Her appearances in the courtroom were increasingly awkward as both critics and fans alike portrayed her as Kody's co-conspirator. Some even went so far as to imply that she had profited most from the backroom deals, citing her bigger house, her exposure to resources, and the fact that Kody stood up for her at every opportunity. The friction within the courtroom eventually spilled out into street battles. Outside the courthouse, outraged fans hurled questions at Robin, demanding answers she wasn't willing to provide. Security stepped in to escort her away while Kody tried to cover for her. But the image only served to intensify the fire. In many eyes, it appeared that Kody was defending Robin while abandoning his other wives to fend for themselves. Inside, the judge probed harder, asking Kody to describe the particular purpose of some accounts. His responses were evasive, full of deflection and general boasts about future opportunity and family stability. But when faced with the actual figures, his excuses fell apart. He stuttered, became argumentative, and then accused his wives of plotting against him. The display was so theatrical that the judge had to ask for order. It was a turning point. Viewers at home called it the mask finally slipping. Kody wasn't the patriarch in control anymore. He was a man cornered by his own deceptions. And in that weakness, the truth was impossible to deny. The disclosures set off a wave of repercussions outside the courtroom. Sponsorships with the family started to fall away silently. Companies linked with the Browns were boycotted. Even TLC, the network that had founded its reputation on their saga, was coming under pressure to release a statement. Insiders claimed that executives were panicking, fearful that their most lucrative show overnight had turned into a liability. But the biggest punch may have come, not from the media or fans, but from the wives themselves. Christine, Janelle, and Mary started talking openly now. No longer censoring themselves, they spoke of being kept in the dark, of having decisions made for them, and of years of trust being broken. For the first time, their voices came together, and collectively they created a picture of betrayal that none could deny. The court case lingered on, but the reputation of Kody was tarnished already. He was no longer viewed as a patriarch working to keep a big family together. He was viewed as a manipulator who had constructed his brand on secrecy. Viewers spoke of being conned, as if the show that they had invested years watching was nothing more than a cover story for negotiations taking place behind closed doors. And still, even as the walls seemed to close in, Kody was defiant. In one interview, he said that his wives had been ungrateful, that they didn't appreciate the sacrifices he had made to create their life. He portrayed himself as a victim, a man persecuted for attempting to create a future no one else had the guts to attempt. But his words rang hollow. Too much had come out. Too much had already been established. For the audience, the narrative had changed. It was no longer centered around the dynamics of polygamy or the difficulty of having a big family. It was about responsibility, deception, and the jarring truth that even the most solid-seeming marriages could be destroyed by greed and secrecy. The slogan "Court Evidence Speaks" was a rallying cry across the internet, repeated endlessly by fans who felt the documents had spoken more loudly than Kody's denials ever had. And with each passing day, the tale darkened, the proof stronger and the Browns' empire more vulnerable. The wives, once united by mutual commitment, now stood together by something else altogether: the pursuit of justice. And as they stood before Kody in the courtroom, their silence no longer insulated him. It convicted him. The last few kilometers of the hearings had an intensity unlike anything that had preceded them. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters huddled shoulder to shoulder, fans clamoring against the glass, and cameras taking in every shift of emotion from the Browns. There was a feeling that the most damning disclosures were yet to surface, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. The judge began the session by citing a thick binder of documents titled "Restricted Accounts." The name alone caused waves in the gallery. For weeks, rumors had circulated over whether Kody had been concealing more money than anyone knew. Now, with this binder in hand, the truth would be revealed. The prosecution led the court step by step through the details. Buried among the plain family accounts were a number of off-the-books accounts, traced directly to Kody. Some were listed in business fronts with generic names. Others linked to consulting fees that no one could track. The figures were astronomical, hundreds of thousands, then millions, stashed away over the span of almost 10 years. The wives sat in silence, their faces aghast. As the numbers were read out, Christine put her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Janelle leaned forward, scribbling notes frantically, her rage simmering just beneath the surface. Mary sat rigid, her face white and taut, as if each number was a blow landing on her chest. And Robin, whose name was associated with several of the accounts, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face betraying a look of fear and defiance. The hardest hit came when a wire transfer appeared on the screen in the courtroom. It revealed a direct transfer of funds from what was termed the Family Education Fund, money earmarked for the children's education, into one of Kody's hidden accounts. The crowd gasped out loud. Christine started to cry openly, shaking her head in shock. The betrayal had extended beyond the wives. It had implicated the children as well. Kody attempted to justify, claiming that the funds had been temporarily transferred and that he always planned to repay them, but the judge rebuked him, telling him that intent didn't matter when millions had already vanished without permission. His voice trembled. Kody never appeared less like a self-assured leader and more like a man losing control of the empire he had constructed. Outside of court, the public furor erupted. News headlines shouted about the Browns' secret deals, and hashtags such as #Brown bank accounts and #Court Evidence Speaks trended globally. People who had previously rallied around Kody defected in mass numbers. To them, what was revealed about the children's fund was a sin. It was no longer greed. It was taking advantage of the very people he professed to care about. The wives, now fueled by the evidence, spoke with a united voice. During interviews, they explained the years of deception, how they had been in the dark, and how deeply the financial breach hurt. Janelle, usually the calm one, stated she would never forgive what had been done with the money belonging to the children. Christine, still tearfully upset, promised to make sure every penny was paid back. Mary, being quiet but firm, stated she had finally seen enough to end her loyalty forever. Robin attempted to protest, explaining she had only signed what was requested by Kody, that she had no idea of the scope of the accounts. Her protestations sounded insincere. Fans posted screenshots of her signature on account after account, denouncing her statements as excuses. She was no longer a mere onlooker to many. She was a complicit in the scam. The high point was when the judge handed down his verdict. He stated that the backroom agreements had breached trust, contractual terms, and in a few instances, state public finance laws. Kody was commanded to reveal the entirety of his accounts and to start restitution payments to the wives without delay. The amount was staggering, $6.5 million in damages, split between Christine, Janelle, and Mary. The courtroom exploded. Christine wept into her hands, relief and sorrow in equal proportion. Janelle nodded solidly, as if justice had at last been done. Mary sat motionless for a second, then expelled a shaking, audible breath, as if years of silence had at last come off her shoulders. Robin did not crack, her eyes flicking toward Kody, who sat huddled in his chair, looking at the floor. The decision was not merely monetary, it was also symbolic. The Browns had worked for years to create a cover of cohesion, of devotion, of perseverance. That facade was destroyed the instant the judge's gavel fell. The family's dynasty, once envied by millions, was now remembered with secrecy, deception, and scandal. Fans' response was great. Comment sections flooded with words of support for the wives and condemnation for Kody. Followers declared they felt validated, that the doubts they had harbored for years had been finally confirmed. The slogan "Court Evidence Speaks" became a rallying cry, a way of declaring that however much denial was raised, it could not hide the truth. The controversy spilled over beyond the family. TLC, under intense scrutiny, issued a carefully crafted statement announcing that they were reviewing the situation. Rumors floated that executives were considering canceling the show completely. Advertisers cooled. What had been one of reality television's most lucrative franchises was now on the verge of imploding. For Kody, the fallout was swift and merciless. His credibility was shattered, his financial empire lost, and his marriage with his wives annihilated. Even Robin, once a close confidante, now had to withstand scrutiny that tested their relationship. The very fabric he had constructed his life on, control, secrecy, authority, had been ripped apart before the eyes of the world. And yet, for the wives, the verdict was not only an end, it was a start. Christine talked about taking back her autonomy and building her life free of the burden of Kody's deception. Janelle spoke of setting up her future and making sure that her children would never have to endure financial dishonesty again. Mari, once silenced so long, finally started to find her voice with confidence, no longer bound to the picture of a family that had never treated her as a priority. The Browns' tale had long been one of intricacy, love, devotion, strife, and determination, but now it was a warning, a reminder that beneath even the most tailored tales can be secrets, so formidable they incinerate everything in their wake. The judge's words hung in the courtroom as it emptied out. Court evidence speaks louder than any defense. And with the Browns' case, the evidence had spoken with crystal clarity. As fans digested the fact of what had happened, a single truth became impossible to ignore. The Browns' empire hadn't fallen because of outside forces or because plural marriage was difficult, or because fame was too much. It fell because of secrets, and once exposed, those secrets extracted a price no one could avoid.